A Child's Story by Charles Dickens. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time, a good many years ago, there was a traveller, and he set out upon a journey. It was a magic journey, and was to seem very long when he began it, and very short when he got half-way through. He travelled along a rather dark path for some little time without meaning anything, until at last he came to a beautiful child. So he said to the child, "What do you do here?" And the child said, "I am always at play. Come and play with me." So he played with that child the whole day long, and they were very merry. The sky was so blue, the sun was so bright, the water was so sparkling, the leaves were so green, the flowers were so lovely, and they heard such singing birds and saw so many butterflies, that everything was beautiful. This was in fine weather. When it rained, they loved to watch the falling drops, and to smell the fresh scent. When it blew, it was delightful to listen to the wind, and fancy what it said as it came rushing from its home. Where was that, they wondered? Whistling and howling, driving the clouds before it, bending the trees, rumbling in the chimneys, shaking the house, and making the sea roar in fury. But when it snowed, that was the best of all. They liked nothing so well as to look up at the white flakes falling fast and thick, like down from the breasts of millions of white birds, and to see how smooth and deep the drift was, and to listen to the hush upon the paths and roads. They had plenty of the finest toys in the world, and the most astonishing picture-books, all about scimitars and slippers and turbans, and dwarfs and giants and genii and fairies, and blue beards and beanstalks, and riches and caverns and forests and valentines and orsons, and all new and all true. But one day, of a sudden, the traveller lost the child. He called to him over and over again, but got no answer. So he went upon his road, and went on for a little while without meeting anything, until at last he came to a handsome boy. So he said to the boy, "What do you do here?" And the boy said, "I am always learning. Come and learn with me." So he learned with that boy about Jupiter and Juno, and the Greeks and the Romans, and I don't know what, and learned more than I could tell, nor he either, for he soon forgot a great deal of it. But they were not always learning. They had the merriest games that ever were played. They rode upon the river in summer, and skated on the ice in winter. They were active of foot and active on horseback, at cricket and all games at ball, at prisoners' base, hare and hounds, follow my leader, and more sports than I can think of. Nobody could beat them. They had holidays, too, and twelfth cakes, and parties where they danced till midnight, and real theatres where they saw palaces of real gold and silver rise out of the real earth, and saw all the wonders of the world at once. As to friends, they had such dear friends, and so many of them, that I want the time to reckon them up. They were all young, like the handsome boy, and were never to be strange to one another all their lives through. Still, one day, in the midst of all these pleasures, the traveller lost the boy as he had lost the child, and after calling to him in vain, went on upon his journey. So he went on for a little while without seeing anything, until at last he came to a young man. So he said to the young man, "What do you do here?" And the young man said, "I am always in love. Come and love with me." So he went away with that young man, and presently they came to one of the prettiest girls that ever was seen, just like Fanny in the corner there. And she had eyes like Fanny, and hair like Fanny, and dimples like Fanny's, and she laughed and colored just as Fanny does while I am talking about her. So the young man fell in love directly, just as somebody I won't mention, the first time he came here, did with Fanny. Well, he was teased sometimes, just as somebody used to be by Fanny, and they quarrelled sometimes, just as somebody and Fanny used to quarrel, and they made it up, and sat in the dark, and wrote letters every day, and never were happy asunder, and were always looking out for one another, and pretending not to, and were engaged at Christmas time, and sat close to one another by the fire, and were going to be married very soon, all exactly like somebody I won't mention and Fanny. But the traveller lost them one day, as he had lost the rest of his friends. After calling to them to come back, which they never did, went on upon his journey. So he went on for a little while without seeing anything, until at last he came to a middle-aged gentleman. So he said to the gentleman, "What are you doing here?" And his answer was, "I am always busy. Come and be busy with me." So he began to be very busy with that gentleman, and they went on through the wood together. The whole journey was through a wood, only it had been open and green at first, like a wood in spring, and now began to be thick and dark, like a wood in summer. Some of the little trees that had come out earliest were even turning brown. The gentleman was not alone, but had a lady of about the same age with him, who was his wife, and they had children who were with them too. So they all went on together through the wood, cutting down the trees, and making a path through the branches and the fallen leaves, and carrying burdens and working hard. Sometimes they came to a long green avenue that opened into deeper woods. Then they would hear a little distant voice crying, "Father, father, I am another child. Stop for me." And presently they would see a very little figure, growing larger as it came along, running to join them. When it came up, they all crowded round it and kissed and welcomed it, and then they all went on together. Sometimes they came to several avenues at once, and then they all stood still, and one of the children said, "Father, I am going to sea," and another said, "Father, I am going to India," and another, "Father, I am going to seek my fortune where I can," and another, "Father, I am going to heaven." So with many tears at parting they went, solitary, down those avenues, each child upon its way, and the child who went to heaven rose into the garden air and vanished. Whenever these partings happened, the traveller looked at the gentleman, and saw him glance up at the sky above the trees, where the day was beginning to decline, and the sunset to come on. He saw, too, that his hair was turning grey, but they could never rest long, for they had their journey to perform, and it was necessary for them to be always busy. At last there had been so many partings that there were no children left, and only the traveller, the gentleman, and the lady went upon their way in company. And now the wood was yellow, and now brown, and the leaves, even of the forest trees, began to fall. So they came to an avenue that was darker than the rest, and were pressing forward on their journey without looking down it, when the lady stopped. "My husband," said the lady, "I am cold." They listened, and they heard a voice a long way down the avenue say, "Mother, mother." It was the voice of the first child who had said, "I am going to heaven." And the father said, "I pray not yet. The sunset is very near. I pray not yet." But the voice cried, "Mother, mother," without minding him, though his hair was now quite white, and tears were on his face. Then the mother, who was already drawn into the shade of the dark avenue, and moving away with her arm still round his neck, kissed him, and said, "My dearest, I am summoned, and I go." And she was gone. and the traveller and he were left alone together. And they went on and on together until they came to very near the end of the wood, so near that they could see the sunset shining red before them through the trees. Yet once more, while he broke his way among the branches, the traveller lost his friend. He called and called, but there was no reply, and when he passed out of the wood and saw the peaceful sun going down upon a wide purple prospect, he came to an old man sitting on a fallen tree. So he said to the old man, "What do you do here?" And the old man said with a calm smile, "I am always remembering. Come and remember with me." So the traveller sat down by the side of that old man, face to face with the serene sunset, and all his friends came softly back and stood around him. The beautiful child, the handsome boy, the young man in love, the father, mother, and children, every one of them was there, and he had lost nothing. So he loved them all, and was kind and forbearing with them all, and was always pleased to watch them all, and they all honored and loved him. And I think the traveller must be yourself, dear grandfather, because this is what you do to us, and what we do to you. End of The Child's Story, by Charles Dickens.
A Christmas Dinner, second part of the first chapter of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, by James Joyce. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A great fire, banked high and red, flamed in the grate, and under the ivy-twined branches of the chandelier the Christmas table was spread. They had come home a little late, and still dinner was not ready. But it would be ready in a jiffy, his mother had said. They were waiting for the door to open, and for the servants to come in, holding the big dishes covered with their heavy metal covers. All were waiting. Uncle Charles, who sat far away in the shadow of the window, Dante and Mr. Casey, who sat in the easy chairs at either side of the hearth, Stephen, seated on a chair between them, his feet resting on the toasted boss. Mr. Dedalus looked at himself in the pier-glass above the mantelpiece, waxed out his moustache ends, and then, parting his coat-tails, stood with his back to the glowing fire, and still from time to time he withdrew a hand from his coat-tail to wax out one of his moustache ends. Mr. Casey leaned his head to one side, and, smiling, tapped at the gland of his neck with his fingers. And Stephen smiled too, for he knew now that it was not true that Mr. Casey had a purse of silver in his throat. He smiled to think how the silvery noise which Mr. Casey used to make had deceived him. And when he had tried to open Mr. Casey's hand to see if the purse of silver was hidden there, he had seen that the fingers could not be straightened out. And Mr. Casey had told him that he had got those 3 cramped fingers, making a birthday present for Queen Victoria. Mr. Casey tapped the gland of his neck and smiled at Stephen with sleepy eyes, and Mr. Dedalus said to him, "Yes, well now, that's all right. Oh, we had a good walk, hadn't we, John? Yes. I wonder if there's any likelihood of dinner this evening? Yes, oh, well now, we got a good braid of ozone round the head today. I be dead." He turned to Dante and said, "You didn't stir out at all, Mrs. Riordan?" Dante frowned and said shortly, "No." Mr. Dedalus dropped his coat-tails and went over to the sideboard. He brought forth a great stone jar of whiskey from the locker and filled the decanter slowly, bending now and then to see how much he had put in. Then, replacing the jar in the locker, he poured a little of the whiskey into 2 glasses, added a little water, and came back with them to the fireplace. "A thimbleful, John," he said, "just to whet your appetite." Mr. Casey took the glass, drank, and placed it near him on the mantelpiece. Then he said, "Well, I can't help thinking of our friend Christopher manufacturing—" He broke into a fit of laughter and coughing, and added, "Manufacturing that champagne for those fellows." Mr. Dedalus laughed loudly. "Is it, Christy?" he said. "There's more cunning in one of those warts on his bald head than in a pack of Jack Foxes." He inclined his head, closed his eyes, and clipping his lips profusely, began to speak with the voice of the hotel-keeper. "And he has such a soft mouth when he's speaking to you, don't you know? He's very moist and watery about the dewlaps. God bless him." Mr. Casey was still struggling through his fit of coughing and laughter. Stephen, seeing and hearing the hotel-keeper through his father's face and voice, laughed. Mr. Dedalus put up his eyeglass, and, staring down at him, said quietly and kindly, "What are you laughing at, you little puppy, you?" The servants entered and placed the dishes on the table. Mrs. Dedalus followed, and the places were arranged. "Sit over," she said. Mr. Dedalus went to the end of the table and said, "Now, Mrs. Riordan, sit over." "John, sit you down, my hearty." He looked round to where Uncle Charles sat, and said, "Now then, sir, there's a berth here waiting for you." When all had taken their seats, he laid his hand on the cover, and then said quickly, withdrawing it, "Now, Stephen." Stephen stood up in his place to say the grace before meals. "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which through thy bounty we are about to receive through Christ our Lord. Amen." All blessed themselves, and Mr. Dedalus, with a sigh of pleasure, lifted from the dish the heavy cover, pearled around the edge with glistening drops. Stephen looked at the plump turkey which had lain, dressed and skewered, on the kitchen table. He knew that his father had paid a guinea for it in Duns of Dollier Street, and that the man had prodded it often at the breastbone to show how good it was. And he remembered the man's voice when he had said, "Take that one, sir. That's the real Alley-Dally." Why did Mr. Barrett in Clongowes call his Spandy-Bat a turkey? But Clongowes was far away, and the warm, heavy smell of turkey and ham and celery rose from the plates and dishes, and the great fire was banked high and red in the grate, and the green ivy and red holly made you feel so happy. And when dinner was ended, the big plum pudding would be carried in, studded with peeled almonds and sprigs of holly, with bluish fire running around it, and the little green flag flying from the top. It was his first Christmas dinner, and he thought of his little brothers and sisters who were waiting in the nursery, as he had often waited, till the pudding came. The deep blue collar and the Eton jacket made him feel queer and oldish, and that morning, when his mother had brought him down to the parlor, dressed for Mass, his father had cried. That was because he was thinking of his own father, and Uncle Charles had said so too. Mr. Dedalus covered the dish and began to eat hungrily. Then he said, "Poor old Christy, he's nearly lopsided now with roguery." "Simon," said Mrs. Dedalus, "you haven't given Mrs. Riordan any sauce." Mr. Dedalus seized the sauce boat. "Haven't I?" he cried. "Mrs. Riordan pitied the poor blind." Then he covered her plate with her hands and said, "No, thanks." Mr. Dedalus turned to Uncle Charles. "How are you off, sir?" "Right as the mail, Simon." "You, John?" "I'm all right. Go on yourself." "Mary?" "Here, Stephen, here's something to make your hair curl." He poured sauce freely over Stephen's plate and set the boat again on the table. Then he asked Uncle Charles, was it tender? Uncle Charles could not speak because his mouth was full, but he nodded that it was. "That was a good answer our friend made to the cannon, what?" said Mr. Dedalus. "I didn't think he had that much in him," said Mr. Casey. "I'll pay your dues, father, when you cease turning the house of God into a polling booth." "A nice answer," said Dante, "for any man calling himself a Catholic to give to his priests." "They have only themselves to blame," said Mr. Dedalus suavely. "If they took the fool's advice, they would confine their attention to religion." "It is religion," Dante said. "They are doing their duty in warning the people." "We go to the house of God," Mr. Casey said, "in all humility to pray to our Maker, and not to hear election addresses." "It is religion," Dante said again. "They are right. They must direct their flocks." "And preach politics from the altar, is it?" asked Mr. Dedalus. "Certainly," said Dante. "It is a question of public morality. A priest would not be a priest if he did not tell his flock what is right and what is wrong." Mrs. Dedalus let down her knife and fork, saying, "For pity's sake, and for pity's sake, let us have no political discussion on this day of all days in the year." "Quite right, ma'am," said Uncle Charles. "Now, Simon, that's quite enough now. Not another word now." "Yes, yes," said Mr. Dedalus quickly. He uncovered the dish boldly and said, "Now then, who's for more turkey?" Nobody answered. Dante said, "Nice language for any Catholic to use." "Mrs. Riordan, I appeal to you," said Mrs. Dedalus, "to let the matter drop now." Dante turned on her and said, "And I am to sit here and listen to the pastors of my church being flouted?" "Nobody is saying a word against them," said Mr. Dedalus, "so long as they don't meddle in politics." "The bishops and priests of Ireland have spoken," said Dante, "and they must be obeyed." "Let them leave politics alone," said Mr. Casey, "or the people may leave their church alone." "You hear," said Dante, turning to Mrs. Dedalus. "Mr. Casey, Simon," said Mrs. Dedalus, "let it end now." Too bad," said Uncle Charles. "What?" cried Mr. Dedalus. "Were we to desert him at the bidding of the English people?" "He was no longer worthy to lead," said Dante. "He was a public sinner." "We are all sinners, and black sinners," said Mr. Casey coldly. "Woe be to the man by whom the scandal cometh," said Mrs. Riordan. "It would be better for him that a millstone were tied about his neck, and that he were cast into the depths of the sea, rather than that he should scandalize one of these my least little ones. That is the language of the Holy Ghost." "A very bad language, if you ask me," said Mr. Dedalus coolly. "Simon, Simon," said Uncle Charles, "the boy." "Yes, yes," said Mr. Dedalus. I was thinking about the bad language of the railway porter." "Well, now, that's all right. Here, Stephen, show me your plate, old chap. Eat away now. Here." He heaped up the food on Stephen's plate and served Uncle Charles and Mr. Casey to large pieces of turkey and splashes of sauce. Mrs. Dedalus was eating little, and Dante sat with her hands in her lap. She was red in the face. Mr. Dedalus rooted with the carves at the end of the dish and said, "There's a tasty bit here. We calls the Pope's nose. If any lady or gentleman—" He held the piece of fowl up on the prong of the carving fork. Nobody spoke. He put it on his own plate, saying, "Well, you can't say but you were asked. I think I had better eat it myself, because I'm not well in my health lately." He winked at Stephen, and, replacing the dish cover, began to eat again. There was a silence while he ate. Then he said, "Well, now, the day kept up fine after all. There were plenty of strangers down, too." Nobody spoke. He said again, "I think there were more strangers down than last Christmas." He looked round at the others, whose faces were bent towards their plates, and, receiving no reply, waited for a moment, and said bitterly, "Well, my Christmas dinner has been spoiled anyhow." "There could be neither luck nor grace," Dante said, "in a house where there is no respect for the pastors of the church." Mr. Dedalus threw his knife and fork noisily on his plate. "Respect," he said. "Is it for Billy with a lip, or for the tub of guts up in Armagh?" "Respect, princes of the church," said Mr. Casey in slow scorn. "Lord Leitrim's coachman, yes," said Mr. Dedalus. "They are the Lord's anointed," Dante said. "They are an honor to their country." "Tub of guts," said Mr. Dedalus coarsely. "He has a handsome face, mind you, in repose. You should see that fellow lapping up his bacon and cabbage of a cold winter's day. Oh, Johnny!" He twisted his features into a grimace of heavy bestiality, and made a lapping noise with his lips. "Really, Simon, you should not speak that before Stephen. It's not right." "Oh, he'll remember all this when he grows up," said Dante hotly. "The language he heard against God and religion," and with rage.
"I shall go to the Christmas
oil, scarlet hibiscus
With rage. "Devil out!"
and strappings and oil, oil, lager beer, and its resultant and my read in English.
"Devil out of hell! We won! We crushed him to death! Fiend!" The door slammed behind her. Mr. Casey, freeing his arms from his shoulders, suddenly bowed his head on his hands with a sob of pain. "Poor Parnell!" he cried loudly. "My dead king!" He sobbed loudly and bitterly. Stephen, raising his terror-stricken face, saw that his father's eyes were full of tears. End of A Christmas Dinner by James Joyce, read by Herman Hoskams.
A Christmas Eve in the far South Seas by Louis Beck, read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Donald MacBride and myself were the only Britishers living on one of the North Pacific island lagoons when Christmas of 1880 drew near, and we determined to celebrate it in a manner that would fill our German and American trading rivals throughout the group with envy. MacBride was a bony, red-headed Scotsman, with a large heart and a small, jealous, half-caste wife. The latter acquisition ruled him with a rod of iron, much to his financial and moral benefit, but nevertheless agreed with me that we, Donald, she, and myself, ought to show the Americans and the Dutchmen how an English Christmas should be celebrated. But as Sarah was a half-caste native of the Pelews, and had never been to a civilized country, she also concurred with me that Donald and myself should run the show, which, although I was not a married man, was to take place in my house on account of the greater space available. Donald, she said, wanted
Powell's eyes widened momentarily, and he stopped on the stairs. Then he recovered and resumed his upward steps. He didn't speak until he reached the head of the flight, and
The Fun They Had by Isaac Asimov. Margie even wrote about it that night in her diary. On the page
The Fun They Had, from Isaac Asimov, The Complete
Whoa, I want to know where I can go when you're not around and I'm feeling down. So won't you stay for a moment so I can say I need you so, 'cause right now you know that nothing heals me, and I'm obsessed with you. Then I fell to the ground, and she smiled at me and said, I don't wanna see you cry. You don't have to feel this emptiness. She said, I love you till the day that I die. Well, maybe she's right, 'cause I don't wanna feel like I'm not me. And to be honest, I don't even know why I let myself get down in the first place. Seen through my eyes. You know you need to get yourself to sleep and dream a dream of you and I. There's no need to keep an open eye. I promise I'm the one for you. Just let me hold you in these arms tonight. I'm lucky to be me. You can see it in my face. Back when I fucked my shit up too many times, why would I let myself get down in the first place? Keep my baby. Some flowers still moving high. Waiting for a minute till the sun seems through my eyes. Take it down, 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 down. Take it down, 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 down. Waiting for a minute till the sun seems through my eyes. And so she sat me down and told me that I didn't have to cry. Said I didn't need to get down or feel empty inside. And then told me that she'll love me for as long as she's alive. And well, maybe she's right, 'cause I hate it when I feel like I'm not me. See, I honestly don't even know why. I honestly don't even know why.
Gentle lights shine afar, leading us under the night. Let our wishes ring through the sky, underneath the stars. Tears fall down, eyes a blur, clutching my diary again. By the window, here as the wind whispers of the future. Cradled by quiet of night,
Tremble as the winter snow.
as a stranger passes by.
You are precious even though
We may not see eye to eye. Peace will be
taking you by the hand under the stars above.
Holy night,
Sacred but shaken I cry as my mind searches the Milky Way. One day I'll find you, the night sky will lead me. Holy night, lay my yearning to bear. Let my words pour out in simple prayer. Smiling beside you, let us be joined in one harmony.
brush in hand, pointed high onto the canvas above. Paint our future free as the sky. Whisper it again. Give me one chance and you'll see.
I will learn to let it go.
At my best is what I'll be.
Not a single grudge I'll hold.
We may find reason to fight, but love surrounds
Now
us.
as our hearts align, let us sing out as one. Holy star, blessed wherever you go. Now I know I've never been alone, guiding me forward. I know that I'll find you. Holy star, laying my yearning to bear. Hear my words, whisper this single prayer, standing beneath our guiding star. Joy will fill up your heart. Holy star, blessed wherever you go. Now I know I've never been alone, guiding me forward. I know that I'll find you. Holy star, laying my yearning to bear. Hear my word, whisper this single prayer.
Standing beside you, your heart will shine brightly.
Joyfully beating, a star glows beside me. Smiling beside you, let us be joined in one harmony.
Holy night, holy star, here with you.
Here for you.
Enjoy.
There is a time of year when snow angels do appear. Sleigh bells and candy canes, tinsel on the window panes. Through nightfalls and snowstorms, it don't matter. You make winter warm.
Strike up the band!
There is a time of year full of merriment and cheer. Snowflakes and silver bells, friends and family wishing well. Lights drawn up and joyful horns, voices singing, you make winter warm. Through nightfalls and snowstorms, we'll celebrate like years before. Home rocking at my door, but with your hand in mine,
A Child's Story by Charles Dickens. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time, a good many years ago, there was a traveller, and he set out upon a journey. It was a magic journey, and was to seem very long when he began it, and very short when he got half-way through. He travelled along a rather dark path for some little time without meaning anything, until at last he came to a beautiful child. So he said to the child, "What do you do here?" And the child said, "I am always at play. Come and play with me." So he played with that child the whole day long, and they were very merry. The sky was so blue, the sun was so bright, the water was so sparkling, the leaves were so green, the flowers were so lovely, and they heard such singing birds and saw so many butterflies, that everything was beautiful. This was in fine weather. When it rained, they loved to watch the falling drops, and to smell the fresh scent. When it blew, it was delightful to listen to the wind and fancy what it said as it came rushing from its home. Where was that, they wondered? Whistling and howling, driving the clouds before it, bending the trees, rumbling in the chimneys, shaking the house, and making the sea roar in fury. But when it snowed, that was the best of all. They liked nothing so well as to look up at the white flakes falling fast and thick, like down from the breasts of millions of white birds, and to see how smooth and deep the drift was, and to listen to the hush upon the paths and roads. They had plenty of the finest toys in the world, and the most astonishing picture books, all about scimitars and slippers and turbans, and dwarfs and giants and genii and fairies, and blue beards and beanstalks, and riches and caverns and forests and valentines and orsons, and all new and all true. But one day, of a sudden, the traveller lost the child. He called to him over and over again, but got no answer. So he went upon his road, and went on for a little while without meeting anything, until at last he came to a handsome boy. So he said to the boy, "What do you do here?" And the boy said, "I am always learning. Come and learn with me." So he learned with that boy about Jupiter and Juno, and the Greeks and the Romans, and I don't know what, and learned more than I could tell, nor he either, for he soon forgot a great deal of it. But they were not always learning. They had the merriest games that ever were played. They rode upon the river in summer, and skated on the ice in winter. They were active of foot and active on horseback, at cricket and all games at ball, at prisoners' base, hare and hounds, follow my leader, and more sports than I can think of. Nobody could beat them. They had holidays, too, and twelfth cakes, and parties where they danced till midnight, and real theatres where they saw palaces of real gold and silver rise out of the real earth, and saw all the wonders of the world at once. As to friends, they had such dear friends, and so many of them, that I want the time to reckon them up. They were all young, like the handsome boy, and were never to be strange to one another all their lives through. Still, one day, in the midst of all these pleasures, the traveller lost the boy as he had lost the child, and after calling to him in vain, went on upon his journey. So he went on for a little while without seeing anything.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Jack Frost nipping at your nose, yeah. Yuletide carols being sung by a choir, and folks dressed up like Eskimos. Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe help to make the season bright. Yeah. Tiny tots with their eyes all aglow will find it hard to sleep tonight.
They know that Santa's on his way. He's loading lots of toys and mini goodies on his sleigh. And every mother's child is gonna spy to see if a reindeer really know how to fly.
And so I'm offering a simple phrase, yeah, that gets from 1 to 92. Although it's been said
Many times,
many ways, Merry Christmas to you. Said many times, many ways.
Merry Christmas,
Merry Christmas, yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Oh, no. Merry Christmas to you.
Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more.
sunshine. I got a love and I know that it's all mine. Oh, do what you want, but you're never gonna break me. Sticks and stones are never gonna shake me. Oh, take me away, a secret place, a sweet escape. Take me away, take me away, take me away, to better days. Take me away, take me away, I got a pocket full of sunshine. I got a love and I know that it's all mine. Oh, do what you want, but you're never gonna break me. Sticks and stones are never gonna shake me. No, never gonna shake me. Never gonna shake me. I got a pocket full of sunshine. I got a love and I know that it's all mine. Oh, I know that it's all mine. Wish that you could, but you ain't gonna own me. Do anything you can to control me. Oh, you can't control me. No, you can't control me. Take me away, a secret place, a sweet escape. Take me away, take me away, take me away, to better days. Take me away. There's a place that I go that nobody knows, where the rivers flow, and I call it home. And there's no more lies, and the darkness is light, and nobody cries. There's only butterflies. Take me away, a secret place, a sweet escape. Take me away, take me away, to better days. Take me away, a hiding place. Take me away, a secret
eyes, don't you see my condition? The nation is gone right again. Can't you see now? Illusions right into your mind. Deja vu, I just been in this place before. Higher on the street, and I know it's my time to go. Calling you, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet, it's so hard when I try to be me. Whoa, deja vu, I just been in this time before. Higher on the beat, and I know it's a place to go. Calling you, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet, it's so hard when I try to be me. Yeah. I know you were gonna come to me, but you better choose carefully. I'm capable of anything, and everything. I'm gonna make you my Aphrodite, make you my one and only. So make me your enemy, your enemy, your enemy. So you wanna play with magic? Girl, you should know what you're falling for. Baby, do you dare to do this? 'Cause I'm coming at you like a dark horse. Are you ready for a burst of fierce storm? 'Cause once you're mine, there's no going back. This love will make you levitate like a bird without a cage. If you choose to walk away, don't walk away. Yes, get love. Hold your hand away. In a different dimension, you walk in my eyes, and I'm ready to believe. Give it all to me. It's me. Take it easy. Infect me with your love and fill me with your poison. Take me. Wanna be a victim, ready like a touchdown. Boy, you're an alien. Touch so foreign. It's supernatural. Extraterrestrial. This is transcendental. On another level. Boy, you're my lucky star. I wanna walk on your wavelength and be there when you vibrate. For you, I'll risk it all. So you wanna play with magic? Infect me with your love and fill me with your poison. Take me, do you dare to do it? Wanna be a victim, ready like a touchdown. Boy, you're an alien. Your touch so foreign. It's supernatural.
You wait just a minute, Paul. It is ignorant, hateful talk like yours that makes this world a place our boys could not live in. They were not dirty. They were not wrong. They were two lonely verses in the Lord's great song.
Our boys were pansies, Bill.
Yes! My boys are homosexual, and that don't scare me none. I want the world to know I love my dead gay son. Now I've been thinking, praying, reading some magazines, and it's time we opened our eyes. Well, the good Lord made the universe, the Lord created man, and I believe it's all a part of his gigantic plan. I know God has a reason for each mountain and each flower, and why he chose to let our boys get busy in the shower. They were not dirty, they were not brutes, they were just two stray laces in the Lord's big boots. Well, I never cared for homos much until I reared me one, but now I've learned to love. I love my dead gay son. The cherubim walk him and him, and Jesus says it's cool. They don't have crime or hatred, there's no bigotry or cursing, just friendly fellows dressed up like their favorite village person. They were not dirty, they just had flair. They were two bright red ribbons in the Lord's long hair. Well, I used to see a homo and go reaching for my gun, but now I've learned to love. And furthermore, these boys were brave as hell. These boys, they knew damn well those folks would judge them. They were desperate to be free. They took a rebel stance, stripped to their underpants. Paul, I can't believe that you still refuse to get a clue. After all that we've been through, I'm talking you and me, in the summer of '83.
That was one hell of a fishing trip.
Job is now continuing the work that they begun.
'Cause now we love, love, love. We love your death.
They're up there disco dancing to the thump of angel wings. They grab a mate and roller skate while Judy Garland sings. They live a playful afterlife that's fancy free and reckless.
They swing up on the pearly gates and wear a pearly necklace.
Woo! They were not dirty, they were good men, and now they're
go forth and love each other now,
like cowboys would have done. We'll teach the world to love, the world to love. I love my dead gay son, my son, my son, dead gay son.
You know, there's Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. Oh, but do you recall the most famous reindeer of all? Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose come on and drive my sleigh tonight. Yeah. How the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history. Hey, Rudolph, come on, you got my sleigh. Hey, Rudolph, come on, you got my sleigh. Hey, Rudolph,
Doesn't really matter if your superpower's firing tuna melt. I tried to join the Justice League, but Batman was a douche to me, and Black Canary wouldn't tell me hi. And Plastic Man just threw a middle finger that was 30 stories high. I got a message from the Great Lakes Avengers. They offered me a membership, but I did not accept, 'cause they're a walking disaster. Like an owl with a fireball, they just don't make sense at all. They're the West.
Enemy spotted. Terrorists win. Enemy spotted. Terrorists win.
Themselves Avengers is a crime. Marcel was Europe's favorite mime, so I guess I'll look around. I tried to join Green Lantern Corps, those Guardians was such a bore. They said no way, but I was unsurprised. And that's okay, those uniforms were so tight that I fear they shape my thighs. I tried to join Fantastic Four, I didn't even reach the door. Who thought that heard me such a serious guy? The reason I was told I could not join was that they're cocky Nazi 5. I got a message from the Great Lakes Avengers. They offered me a membership, but I did not accept, 'cause they're a walking disaster. Like an owl with a fireball, they just don't make sense at all. They're the worst use of all time. To call themselves Avengers is a crime. Marcel was Europe's favorite mime, so I guess I'll look around. But yeah, they just kept calling me and hounding me. They said I fit their lineup to a T, and as my options they were dwindling down, I kept holding out. There's something better I thought was in store for me, in store for me. Doom Patrol, no way. Cyber Force, no way. Alpha Flight, no way. Also, you are not Canadian. Power Pack 2, old. JSA 2, yo. Birds of Prey, you're a dude. So I guess I'll join the Great Lakes Avengers. They offered me a membership, and so I did accept, though they're a walking disaster. I find the heart of gold is something that cannot be sold, 'cause they're the worst use of all time. It's remarkable they ever stop a crime. Sitting poolside with free beer and lime, so I guess I'll stick around. So I guess I'll stick around. So I guess I'll stick around. Yeah, I guess I'll stick around. Started in the morning, my head was getting hazy, couldn't keep my feet on the ground. She was making love to the mirror in the bathroom, didn't hear me talking out loud. Bubblegum lipstick, baby's got me nervous, something's got a hold on my feet. You just wanna go where your problems won't follow, baby, that's okay with me. Set fire, just a little spark, that's how it goes when you're moving in the dark. Set fire, just a little spark, that's how it goes when you're moving in the dark. Got no money, still ain't that cool. I'm the little punker who's kissing you. Forget what you heard about modern love. She's still in the mirror, honey, fixing a mug, and I'm like, set fire, just a little spark, that's how it goes when you're moving in the dark. Live fast if you're feeling running hard, just how it goes when you're moving in the dark. Kiss, kiss, statuesque out in the street. I don't really wanna be a part of your scene. Best up, all the same, kids in my city. It's less about what you say and more looking pretty, and I'm like, set fire with just a little spark, that's how it goes when you're moving in the dark. Live fast if you're feeling running hard, just how it goes when you're moving in the dark. Started in the morning, my head was getting hazy, couldn't keep my feet on the ground. She was making love to the mirror in the bathroom, didn't hear me talking out loud. Bubble, you just wanna go where your problems won't follow, baby, that's okay with me.
All is forgiven, baby. Come on, get dressed. You're my date to the pep rally tonight. You chucked me out like I was trash. For that, you should be dead. But then it hit me like a flash. What if high school went away instead? Those assholes are the key. They're keeping you away from me. They made you blind, messed up your mind, but I can set you free. You left me and I fell apart. I punched the wall and cried, bam, bam, bam. Then I found you changed my heart and set loose all that truth bullshit inside. And so I built a bomb. Tonight our school is Vietnam. Let's guarantee they never see their senior prom. I was meant to be yours. We were meant to be one. Don't give up on me now. Finish what we've begun. I was meant to be yours. So when the high school gym goes boom, with everyone inside, in the rubble of their tomb, we'll plant this note explaining why they died. We, the students of Westerberg High, will die. Our burned bodies may finally get through. To you, your society turns out slaves and blanks. No thanks. Signed, the students of Westerberg High. Goodbye. We'll watch the smoke pour out the doors. Bring marshmallows, we'll make s'mores. We can smile and cuddle while the fire roars. I was meant to be yours. We were meant to be one. I can't make it alone. Finish what we've begun. You were meant to be mine. I am all that you need. You carved open my heart. Can't Open the door, please, Veronica. Open the door, Veronica. Can we not fight anymore, please? Can we not fight anymore? Veronica, sure you're scared, I've been there. I can set you free. Veronica, don't make me come in there. I'm gonna count to 3. 1, 2, fuck it. Oh my God. No. Veronica, please don't leave me alone. You were all I could trust. I can't do this alone. Still I will if I must.
Veronica, I brought you a snack. Veronica?
someone else. All by myself, all by myself. Pulling on this red shirt, looking at your picture. Cause that broken summer's hanging over me. Drowning in the sunshine, and I've spent a long time thinking, girl, you got the best of me. Hopping on the flight, then make it back to Austin. Finding I get lost in all the modern leaves. I just walk around now, stranger in my hometown. Broken summer's hanging over me. Broken summer. Broken summer. Broken summer. Broken summer. Lover of mine, what would it take? Could I walk the miles off of all our mistakes? I'm getting tired, too far away. Though I keep on trying, it keeps taking me back to us. Back to us. Cause I feel like someone else. All by myself, all by myself. Pulling on this red shirt, looking at your picture. Cause that broken summer's hanging over me. Drowning in that sunshine, and I've spent a long time thinking, girl, you got the best of me. Hopping on the flight, then make it back to Austin. Finding I get lost in all the modern leaves. I just walk around now, stranger in my hometown. Broken summer's hanging over me. Broken summer. 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 Broken summer.
Make her remember a